In the heart of winter's unyielding grip, where the moon wept silver tears upon the frozen earth, a single flame dared to defy the night by blooming into thorns of crimson. Caressa Dawnvale stood bound at the edge of the pyre, her wrists raw from the coarse ropes that bit into her skin like the teeth of forgotten wolves. The air hung heavy with the scent of pine smoke and damp earth, the mountain winds howling through the jagged peaks of the Eldridge Range as if mourning what was to come. She was 25 winters old, her once vibrant auburn hair now matted and streaked with frost, falling in tangled waves over a body that carried the weight of betrayal. The packs had gathered in the shadowed square below the Alpha's citadel, a sprawling fortress of ice-veined stone that loomed like a sentinel against the starless sky. Alphas from rival clans, betas with hardened gazes, and omegas who averted their eyes in silent complicity, they all bore witness to her condemnation. The charge was whispered like a curse through the assembly. She had lain with a stranger under the forbidden lunar convergence, that rare alignment when the moon's pull twisted fates and stirred forbidden desires. The child she carried was deemed a pollutant, a stain upon the sacred bloodlines that bound their kind. The Dusa demands purity, the High Elder had intoned earlier that eve, his voice a gravelly rumble echoing off the cavernous halls. This Omega's womb harbors chaos, not legacy. Caressa's pack, the Silverfang, had turned on her swiftly. Her alpha mate, once tender in the quiet hours, now stood at the forefront, his jaw set like forged steel, guilt flickering in his eyes like a dying ember. He had not defended her. None had. She placed both hands over her belly, feeling the faint flutter within, a life that stirred not with violence, but with a quiet insistence, as if the child already knew the world's cruelty. The wood beneath her feet was stacked high, kindling from the ancient yew trees that bordered their territories, their branches sacred to the moon goddess. Torches sputtered in the biting cold, casting elongated shadows that danced across the snow-dusted ground. The wind carried distant weavos, not of triumph, but of unease, as if the wilds themselves sensed the fracture in the natural order. The executioner, a beta scarred from border skirmishes, approached with a flaming brand. His face was a mask of duty, eyes hollowed by the endless cycle of pack law. "For the bloodline," he muttered, thrusting the torch into the base of the pyre. Flames licked upward hungrily, devouring the dry tinder with a crackle that pierced the night's hush. Heat bloomed against Caressa's bare legs, chasing away the numbness of the frost, but awakening a deeper ache. She did not scream. Instead, she closed her eyes, inhaling the acrid bite of smoke that clawed at her throat, mingling with the metallic tang of fierce sweat from the crowd. The fire rose, a roaring beast of orange and gold, its tendrils reaching for her hem, her skin. Pain seared her ankles first, sharp and unrelenting, but Caressa held her ground, her palms pressing firmer against the swell of her abdomen. Not a curse, she thought, her mind a whirlwind of fragmented memories. The convergence night, the stranger's touch like moonlight on water, urgent and inevitable. A covenant. Whispers of ancient lore surfaced unbidden, tales of Omegas who bore the Dusa's mark, children forged in lunar fire to mend broken thrones. But those were myths, dismissed by elders as the ravings of the desperate. Then the impossible unfurled. From the heart of the blaze, where the flames should have consumed her, crimson petals erupted like blood spilled on snow. Roses, impossibly vibrant, their thorns glinting like obsidian under the moon's gaze, unfurled from the inferno, twisting through the pyre's structure. The fire did not burn her, it transformed. Petals scattered on the updraft, drifting down to the square in a scarlet rain, brushing against the faces of the stunned assembly. One landed on the alpha mate's cheek, drawing a bead of blood that mirrored its hue. Gasps rippled through the packs, a collective inhalation that silenced even the wind. Caressa's eyes snapped open, the heat now a gentle warmth, like the sun's first kiss after endless night. The ropes around her wrists frayed and fell away, singed but unburnt, as vines of thorny stem wrapped protectively around her form, shielding her from the dying embers. She stepped forward, unscathed, the child within kicking as if in triumph. The miracle hung in the air, tangible as the petals carpeting the ground, their fragrance cutting through the smoke, a heady mix of earth and iron, life defying death. Chaos erupted. The High Elder staggered back, his staff clattering to the stones. "Witchcraft!" he bellowed, but his voice cracked with doubt. Alphas drew blades, their armors catching the moonlight in prismatic shards, while Omegas clutched at one another, murmuring of signs and portents. Caressa's former mate lunged forward, his face a storm of confusion and regret, but she met his gaze with steel in her own. "The Deusa has spoken," she said, her voice steady, carrying over the tumult like a uivo across the peaks. "What you cast as pollution, she claims as sacred." Betas moved to seize her anew, but the roses, those impossible blooms, seemed to pulse with an inner light, their thorns lashing out at any who approached too near. One guard cried out as a vine snared his ankle, drawing blood that seeped into the snow, staining it red. The crowd parted, a sea of wide eyes and whispered fears as Caressa descended from the pyre, her bare feet leaving faint imprints in the petal-strewn frost. She did not run. Not yet. The winds howled fiercer now, carrying the scent of impending storm, and in the distance the moon crested higher, its glow bathing her in ethereal silver. Exile awaited, but not as they intended. The child stirred again, a promise woven into her blood, and Caressa knew this was no end, but a beginning forged in fire and rose. As the packs closed in, blades glinting and voices rising in a cacophony of accusation, she turned toward the shadowed tree line, the weight of destiny settling upon her like a crown of thorns. The night was far from over, and the wilds called her name. The snow-laden pines whispered secrets as Caressa plunged into the tree line, the chaos of the square fading behind her like a fever dream. Her bare feet sank into the drifts, each step a numb protest against the cold that clawed up her legs, but the warmth from the pyre lingered in her veins, a faint echo of the rose's impossible embrace. Petals clung to her tattered shift, their crimson edges curling like dried blood against the white expanse, a symbol she could not shake, life's defiance etched in thorns. The child within her shifted restlessly, as if sensing the peril in every shadow, every gust that tore at her hair like vengeful spirits. Exile was not a word. It was the bite of frost on her lips, the hollow ache where pack bonds once thrummed. The Silver Fang had been her world, nights of shared howls under the moon, the alpha mate's hand on her nape in quiet claiming. Now that world spat her out, a vessel of forbidden fruit, condemned for a convergence she could not unmake. The winds howled through the Eldridge Range, carrying the distant clamor of pursuit. Boots crunching snow, blades rasping from sheaths, voices barking orders laced with fear. "The witch flees!" one shouted, the echo bouncing off icy cliffs like a curse. She ran, breath-ragged plumes in the lunar glow, the moon hanging low and bloated, its silver light fracturing on the frozen river that snaked through the valley below. Her body, heavy with child, betrayed her, muscles burning, vision blurring at the edges. But surrender was not woven into her blood. Not after the fire's mercy. The roses had marked her, their scent trailing her like a shroud, earth and iron, a reminder that some flames birthed rather than devoured. She pressed a hand to her belly, feeling the faint pulse beneath, a covenant unspoken yet unbreakable. The forest thickened, ancient sentinels of fir and spruce cloaked in rime, their branches heavy with the weight of endless winters. Caressa's lungs burned as she crested a ridge, the ground sloping into a ravine where moonlight pooled like spilled mercury. There, In the hollow's cradle, she stumbled upon the impossible. A figure sprawled against a boulder, his form half buried in snow, chest heaving with labored breaths. He was no ordinary wanderer, an alpha, by the breadth of his shoulders and the faint aura that prickled her skin, even through the chill. His cloak, once fine wool embroidered with the insignia of a distant crest, a snarling wolf wreathed in thorns, was torn and bloodied, staining the white ground in dark rivulets. She froze, instinct warring within. Flee or aid. Omegas were taught to yield to alphas, to sense their dominance like the pull of tides. But this one radiated not command, but fracture. His face, shadowed by a hood, bore the mark of nobility. High cheekbones scarred by claw and blade, eyes half-lidded in pain, the color of storm-tossed seas. Blood seeped from a gash across his ribs, the metallic tang cutting through the pine-scented air, mingling with the rose's fading perfume on her skin. He stirred as she approached, a low growl rumbling from his throat, more wounded beast than king. "Who?" His voice was gravel and smoke, laced with the authority of one who had commanded packs, yet undercut by exhaustion. He tried to rise, hand fumbling for a sword hilt at his side, but collapsed back, wincing as fresh crimson welled from the wound. Caressa hesitated, fear coiling in her gut like a serpent. Alphas were peril incarnate, rulers who enforced the very laws that had bound her to the pyre. Yet curiosity bloomed unbidden, sharp as the thorns that had shielded her. She knelt, the snow soaking through her shift, and tore a strip from her hem, the fabric whispering against her fingers. "A fugitive," she murmured, more to herself than him, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. The connection sparked then, instinctive and unwelcome. A thread of empathy pulling taut, her omega senses attuned to his alpha pain, his guilt mirroring her own rejection. But she denied it, rationalizing the pull as mere survival, two exiles in the wilds, bound by necessity, not fate. He eyed her warily, nostrils flaring at her scent, omega pregnant, laced with the inexplicable floral bite of the pyre. "Leave me," he rasped, but his gaze lingered on the swell of her belly, then the petals caught in her hair. "You're marked. What sorcery?" "No sorcery," she replied, pressing the cloth to his wound, ignoring the spark where her fingers brushed his skin. Warm despite the cold. The blood soaked through instantly, hot and viscous. But the act grounded her, a small defiance against the night. He winced, muscles tensing under her touch, yet did not pull away. In that moment, under the moon's unblinking watch, the winds softened, as if the Deusa herself held breath. Pursuers' shouts echoed faintly from the ridge, drawing nearer, torches flickering like angry stars through the trees. The alpha's eyes sharpened, scanning the darkness. "They're coming for you. And me." His words carried the weight of secrets. A king in hiding, perhaps, haunted by betrayals of his own. Caressa's heart pounded, the child's kick a urgent drumbeat. Fear and curiosity twisted into something sharper. Alliance, born of shared shadows. They moved as one then, his arm slung over her shoulder, her strength surprising even herself as she half-dragged him toward a nearby cave mouth, its entrance veiled by icicles like jagged teeth. The refuge swallowed them, the air inside thick with the scent of damp stone and forgotten earth. He slumped against the wall, breaths shallow, while she kindled a small fire with flint from his pouch, flames dancing low, casting their faces in gold and shadow. Empathy stirred, unbidden. His pain echoed her exile, a mirror of guilt and loss. But she pushed it down, tending the wound with steady hands, the rose's petals falling like silent witnesses. As the fire crackled, warding off the encroaching cold, the alpha's gaze met hers across the flames. "I am Thorn Blackthorn," he said at last, voice a confession in the gloom. "Once king of the Iron Claw, now cursed by my own blade." Guilt shadowed his words, a melancholy veil over the ethical core she sensed beneath. A ruler who had chosen duty over heart, only to find both shattered. Caressa nodded, the name stirring whispers of legend. A alpha who had waged wars for purity, only to lose his throne to treachery. The connection hummed, denied yet insistent, as distant uivos pierced the night, hunters closing in. In this fragile sanctuary, bonds forged not in passion, but in the raw forge of survival. And now, I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from, and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel, and at what moments of the night they find you. The cave's embrace was a reluctant mercy, its walls etched with the patient scars of forgotten winters, where frost clung like spectral fingers to the stone. Caressa's breath mingled with the alpha's in the dim glow of their meager fire, the flames licking at twisted roots that jutted from the earth floor like the bones of the mountain itself. Thorn Blackthorn's wound wept steadily under her makeshift bandage, the metallic scent of his blood weaving through the damp air, a counterpoint to the faint, lingering perfume of roses that haunted her skin. She sat across from him, knees drawn to her chest, the swell of her belly a warm anchor against the chill that seeped from every crevice. The child stirred faintly, as if lulled by the crackle of embers, but Caressa's mind raced, a whirlwind of exile's sharp edges and this stranger's shadowed gaze. He watched her in silence at first, his storm-gray eyes reflecting the fire's dance, etched with lines that spoke of thrones lost and oaths unbroken. Thorn's frame, broad and battle-hardened, slumped against the rough-hewn wall, his cloak draped over them both like a shared shroud. The insignia on its frayed edge, a wolf entwined in thorns, caught the light, a relic of Ironclaw glory now reduced to tatters. Guilt clung to him thicker than the snow outside, a melancholy weight that pulled at her omega instincts, urging her to soothe, to yield. But she resisted, rationalizing the pull as the cave's confinement, nothing more. Alphas like him had forged the laws that condemned her. His kind ruled with iron claws, demanding purity she could never embody. "Why aid me?" His voice broke the hush, low and threaded with gravel, carrying the echo of commands once issued from high halls. He shifted, wincing as the motion tugged at his ribs, fresh blood seeping through the cloth she had bound there. An omega on the run, heavy with, "Whatever curse they named yours, you owe the world nothing." Caressa met his gaze, the fire's warmth a fragile barrier against the cold knot in her chest. The wind outside howled through the ravine, a mournful uivo that mimicked the distant cries of her pursuers, Silverfang betas perhaps, or Ironclaw remnants hunting their fallen king. She could hear the crunch of boots on snow, faint but insistent, torches hissing against the night. "Curse?" she echoed, her fingers tracing the edge of a rose petal that had lodged in her hair, its crimson edge curling like a dried wound. "The pyre should have taken me. It didn't. If that's a curse, then mercy is too." Her voice held steady, but beneath it lay the fracture. The alpha mate's betrayal, the pack's averted eyes, the flutter of life within her that demanded she endure. Thorn's lips twisted in a wry shadow of a smile, pain etching deeper furrows across his brow. "Mercy, a word kings whisper before the blade falls." He leaned forward, the fire casting his scars in stark relief, claw marks from some ancient skirmish, a jagged line across his jaw from a traitor's kiss. "I led the Ironclaw through blood and border wars, enforcing the Deusa's purity with every decree. My mate, she bore no child, no heir. When the lunar convergence came, whispers of weakness spread. My beta advisor turned the packs against me, claiming I had failed the bloodline. I fled rather than spill more kinblood. Now I'm the pollutant." His confession hung heavy, a mirror to her own shame, his ethical core laid bare, not the tyrant of legends, but a man haunted by duty's cruel calculus. Empathy uncoiled in her chest, unbidden and warm, like the fire's tendrils reaching for more fuel. She saw it then, the guilt that mirrored her rejection, his melancholy a echo of her isolation. The child kicked sharply, as if affirming the thread between them, and Caressa pressed her palm there, feeling the rhythm sync with the alpha's labored breaths. Outside, a howl pierced the gale. Closer now, wolves or men, their pursuit a tightening noose. Thorn tensed, his hand groping for the sword at his belt, but weakness betrayed him, the blade clattering uselessly. Instinct surged. Caressa rose, the cave's chill nipping at her bare arms, and moved to his side. "We can't stay." Her words were practical, a shield against the vulnerability blooming within. She helped him to his feet, his weight heavy across her shoulders, his scent, pine smoke and iron resolve, enveloping her like the wind's embrace. The connection deepened in that shared strain, fear forging something tentative, a bond born not of desire but necessity's raw edge. They slipped toward the cave's rear, where a narrow fissure led deeper into the mountain's veins, the air growing thicker, laced with the mineral tang of underground streams. As they pressed on, the fissure widened into a hidden chamber, its ceiling a vault of glittering ice that refracted the faint light from a crevice above, moonlight filtering down like Dusa's veiled gaze. Thorn collapsed against a ledge, his breaths ragged, while Caressa scanned the shadows. The pursuers' voices echoed distantly, muffled by stone, but the threat lingered, a specter of the world that had cast them both adrift. She knelt beside him again, tearing another strip from her shift to reinforce the bandage, her fingers brushing the heat of his skin. "What is strength?" she murmured, the philosophy slipping unbidden from her lips. "If not choosing mercy when the pack demands blood?" His eyes locked on hers, the storm within them softening, curiosity flickering amid the guilt. "And what is redemption? If not facing the fire, we lit ourselves?" The words bridged them, empathy transforming into a fragile vinculum, the omega-alpha pull humming like a distant weevo under the moon. But she denied its depth, attributing it to the cave's intimacy, the shared peril. The child stirred once more, a quiet insistence, as if the covenant within her sensed the alpha's fractured destiny intertwining with her own. Outside, the storm raged fiercer, snow lashing the entrance like whips of fate, but in that chamber the flames of their small torch, kindled from embers carried in Thorn's pouch, danced on, a symbol of endurance amid the gathering dark. Yet as the howls drew nearer, Caressa felt the weight of unspoken truths pressing in. Her miracle at the pyre was no isolated grace. It pulsed within her, waiting to reveal itself, and in Thorn's haunted gaze she glimpsed the key to his curse, a redemption neither could yet name. The night deepened, dilemmas coiling like thorns around their fragile sanctuary, forcing the question. Could two exiles forge mercy from the blood of their pasts? The chamber's icy vault seemed to pulse with the mountain's hidden heartbeat, moonlight splintering through the crevice above like fractured prophecies. Caressa's fingers trembled as she adjusted the torch's flame, its golden flicker warring against the encroaching shadows that clawed at the edges of their refuge. Thorn's breaths came in shallow rasps beside her, his body a furnace of feverish heat despite the pallor etching his skin. The wound at his ribs now a throbbing betrayal of the night's relentless pursuit. The air hung thick with the mineral bite of underground streams and the faint iron-laced whisper of his blood, mingling with the rose's elusive perfume that still clung to her like a second skin. Petals desiccated but defiant, scattered across the stone floor like crimson omens. She pressed her back against the ledge, the chill seeping through her threadbare shift, a stark contrast to the insistent warmth blooming low in her belly. The child moved again, not with the gentle flutter of before, but an insistent surge, as if drawing power from the moon's veiled gaze. Distant howls reverberated through the stone, Pursuers, their voices a tangled chorus of Silverfang zeal and Ironclaw vendetta, closing the noose with predatory precision. Caressa's heart hammered, fear coiling tight in her chest, but beneath it stirred something deeper, uncharted, a hum in her veins, like the earth's core awakening, pulling at the threads of her omega essence. Thorn shifted, his gray eyes locking onto hers with the intensity that pierced the gloom. The sounds. They're upon us. His voice was a low rumble, laced with the melancholy resolve of one who had stared down armies, yet now faced oblivion in a forgotten hollow. He gripped his sword hilt, knuckles whitening. But weakness dragged at him, his free hand hovering near her arm, not in command, but in unspoken alliance. The ethical king she glimpsed in his confessions flickered there, duty-bound, guilt-ridden, a man who had enforced purity's blade only to find it turned against him. If they find us, they'll take you back to that pyre, and me, to the traitor's noose. She shook her head, the motion dislodging a rose petal that fluttered to the ground, its edges curling like a lover's plea. No. The word escaped her lips, fierce and unyielding, as the hum intensified, a vibration that resonated from her core, syncing with the child's rhythm, spreading outward like roots seeking soil. Her hands, unbidden, rose to her abdomen, palms flattening against the swell, as if to contain the building pressure. The torch flame leaped suddenly, casting elongated shadows that writhed across the walls, and the moonlight from above sharpened, bathing her in a prismatic silver that made the air shimmer. It began as a whisper, then a bloom. From her fingertips, faint tendrils of crimson unfurled, not illusions, but tangible vines, thorny and vibrant, twisting from her skin like the pyre's miracle reborn. They snaked across the stone, seeking the torch's base, where they entwined with the flames, transforming the ordinary fire into a lattice of glowing embers and petals. Roses erupted in clusters, their petals unfolding with a soft sigh, filling the chamber with that heady scent of earth and blood, life forged from peril. The vines climbed the walls, sealing the fissure's edges with a barrier of thorns that pulsed with inner light, the moonlight refracting through them in shards of ruby and silver. Caressa's breath caught, her eyes widening as the manifestation coursed through her, a gift hidden until now, awakened by the covenant within. It was no sorcery of malice, but a lunar grace, the Pathfinder's touch. As the ancient lore whispered, an Omega's ability to weave paths through chaos, to reveal destinies veiled by fear and betrayal. The child was its vessel, a bridge between bloodlines, mending what wars had torn. She felt it viscerally, the pull of forgotten thrones, the Deuce's hand guiding her veins like rivers of starlit water. Pain lanced through her, sharp as thorns piercing flesh, but it was laced with revelation, the weight of her rejection alchemizing into power. Thorn stared, transfixed, his sword forgotten as he pushed himself upright, the fever in his eyes yielding to awe. The vines brushed his wound, their thorns drawing a bead of blood that seeped into the stems, only for the petals to bloom fuller. The bleeding staunched as if the roses drank his guilt and returned healing. You. His voice cracked, the melancholy king glimpsing eternity in her glow. The flames at the pyre, they were your doing, not chance, but covenant. He reached out, hesitating, his fingers hovering near a vine before tracing its curve. The contact sending a spark through them both, an alpha's recognition of the Omega who held his fate. In her, he saw the key. The child she carried, born of convergence, was no pollutant, but the redeemer of fractured packs, the one to crown mercy over bloodlines poisoned by purity's lie. The realization settled upon him like a crown of thorns, his ethical core igniting with purpose. Guilt, once a shroud, sharpened into resolve, he, who had fled his throne to spare kinblood, now understood, Her gift illuminated his path, demanding he choose redemption over exile. "The Ironclaw scrolls speak of the Pathfinder," he murmured, voice threaded with wonder and dread. "An omega marked by lunar fire, bearer of the thorn-wreathed air. You are she, the one to unravel the traitor's web, to bind the packs not in war, but in sacrifice." His gaze met hers, the connection no longer denied but embraced, a visceral pull that transcended instinct, love's first shadow, redemption's proof. Outside, the howls crescendoed, boots scraping stone as pursuers breached the cave's outer mouth, their torches a distant roar. But the vines held, thorns lashing at the air like guardians, buying them breath. Caressa's body trembled with the effort, sweat beading on her brow, the child's kicks a triumphant echo. In that moment, under the moon's fractured benediction, she felt reborn, not as victim, but as harbinger. Yet the dilemma lingered. To wield this gift meant confronting the pack's shadows, her past's blade at her throat. Thorn's hand found hers then, warm and steady, a vow unspoken amid the blooming roses. The night pressed in, the revelation a double-edged bloom, promise and peril intertwined, forcing her to question, was destiny a chain or a crown? Subscribe if you believe mercy can crown even the fallen. Comment Luna if you'd walk through the storm for someone who saw you're the thorns of revelation coiled tighter around the chamber's heart. Their crimson blooms pulsing like veins beneath the fractured moonlight, a living testament to the gift that now coursed through Caressa's blood. She withdrew her hand from Thorn's, the warmth of his touch lingering like an unwelcome ember, as the vines retracted slowly, coiling back into her skin with a whisper of silk on stone. Exhaustion tugged at her limbs. The child's insistent kicks a reminder of the power's toll, each surge drawing from her essence, weaving the covenant deeper into her marrow. The air thrummed with the scent of fresh earth and iron, roses unfurling in defiant clusters along the walls, their petals catching the silver light in prisms of blood and mercy. Thorn's gaze held hers, storm-gray depths alight with the weight of what he had witnessed. The king who had fled his throne now rose unsteadily, the wound at his ribs sealed by the vine's improbable grace, blood no longer seeping but absorbed into the stems like an offering. "The Pathfinder," he repeated, the words a low incantation. His voice threaded with the melancholy of one who had long sought absolution in scrolls and stars. Guilt etched his features sharper than any blade, the ethical ruler confronting the truth. His wars for purity had sown the very chaos her child was destined to mend. Yet in his eyes flickered not dominance, but a quiet yielding, a alpha recognizing the Omega's hidden sovereignty. The howls outside shattered the fragile hush, no longer distant echoes, but a thunderous chorus crashing against the cave's mouth. Torches flared through the fissure, their orange fury clashing with the rose's inner glow, as shadows elongated into forms. Betas from the Silverfang, their fur cloaks dusted with snow, blades drawn and eyes wild with zeal. Leading them was her former mate, Garrick, his broad frame silhouetted against the storm, jaw clenched in a mask of righteous fury. Beside him strode a rival alpha, Lord Varric of the Storm Ridge Pack, Thorn's betrayer, the beta advisor who had whispered poison into Ironclaw ears, his lean face scarred by ambition, eyes gleaming with the hunger of one who claimed thrones through treachery. Varric's armor, etched with lightning runes, caught the moonlight in cold flashes, a symbol of the power that had toppled kings and condemned Omegas alike. "Caressa!" Garrick's voice boomed, raw with conflict, as his pack forced the thorn barrier, vines lashing out to draw blood from outstretched arms, petals scattered like confetti of war, staining the snow red. The Diusa's judgment was clear. Come back and face it properly. This abomination ends tonight. His gaze flicked to her belly, then to Thorn, recognition dawning like a storm cloud. Betrayal twisted his features. He had been her protector once, his touch gentle under moonlit skies, but Packlaw had forged him into its blade. Varric laughed, a hollow bark that echoed off the ice, his sword raised to sever a encroaching vine, and the fallen king crawls from his hole. Thorn Blackthorn, the purity enforcer, hiding with a witch's whelp. The Pax will thank me for cleansing both stains. His words dripped venom, revealing the traitor's core, a rival who had orchestrated Thorn's exile not for weakness, but to seize the Ironclaw throne, twisting lunar lore into tools of ambition. The Pax behind him, Silverfang loyalists mingled with Stormridge warriors, murmured assent, their uivos a cacophony of fear and fervor, the wind whipping snow into a blinding veil that blurred the line between hunter and hunted. Caressa stood, the chamber's chill forgotten in the fire of confrontation, her hands instinctively shielding her abdomen as the child surged within, sinking with the rose's pulse. The past crashed upon her like an avalanche. Garrick's averted eyes at the pyre, the Pack's complicity in her binding, the convergence night that had birthed this covenant from forbidden union. Introspection clawed at her. Had she ever truly belonged, or was she always the outlier, her omega heart too soft for their iron world? The gift hummed, vines stirring at her feet, ready to bloom or bind, but the choice loomed visceral. Unleash the thorns in war, spilling blood that mirrored her own rejection, or seek forgiveness, a mercy that might chain her to the very laws that had scorched her. Thorn stepped forward, his presence a shield at her side, sword now in hand, its blade catching the torchlight in a gleam of ancient gold. "Varric," he growled, voice steady despite the pallor of his face, guilt fueling resolve rather than fracture. "Your whispers poisoned the bloodlines you claim to guard. The Deusa's true covenant stands before you, not in purity's blade, but in sacrifice's rose." His ethical core shone through, the melancholy king offering not vengeance, but a plea. End the cycle, or be consumed by it. Yet Varric lunged, blade arcing toward Thorn's throat, the clash ringing like thunder as the fallen king parried, sparks flying into the roses that ignited briefly, petals curling in harmless flame. Caressa moved without thought, her gift erupting, a cascade of vines surging from the ground, ensnaring Varric's legs, thorns piercing leather boots to draw beads of blood that fed the blooms fuller. Garrick hesitated, his sword half raised, eyes locking on hers in a storm of regret and longing. "Caressa, please," he rasped, voice breaking the din, the wind howling his turmoil. "The Pax. We were wrong. But war—" The dilemma tore at her, philosophical thorns piercing deeper than any physical blade. What was freedom, if won through the blood of those she had once called kin? Love, for Thorn, nascent and resisted, bloomed in the chaos, his glance a anchor amid the fray, or forgiveness, extending mercy to the betrayers, risking the child's future for a fragile peace. The roses wept petals in the melee, scattering across the snow-slick stone, their fragrance a plea amid the metallic tang of drawn blood and sweat-soaked fur. Varric wrenched free, roaring as he slashed at the vines, freeing himself only to charge again, his pack surging forward in a wave of steel and snarls. Thorn met them, blade singing through the air, but numbers pressed, a beta's dagger grazing his arm, fresh crimson spilling to nourish the earth. Caressa's heart fractured, pardon or perish, compassion or conquest, the moral scales tipping with each beat of the child's insistent rhythm. She raised her hands, the gift poised on the edge of Revelation's fury, the moon above fracturing further as if the Deusa herself awaited her verdict. In that suspended breath, amid the clash of destinies, Caressa whispered to the night, was redemption forged in forgiveness's fragile bloom, or war's unyielding thorn? The choice hung, a crown or a noose, as the Pax closed in, blood and roses mingling in the storm's embrace. The storm's fury lashed the chamber like the Deusa's own wrath, snow whipping through the breached fissure in gusts that carried the sharp tang of blood and scorched fur. Caressa's hands hovered in the air, trembling with the gift's volatile surge, vines twisting at her command like extensions of her fractured will. The roses bloomed amid the chaos, their thorns drawing crimson from the intruder's flesh, petals scattering across the slick stone in a macabre carpet that muffled the clash of steel. Thorn fought at her side, his blade a blur of ancient gold, parrying Varric's relentless strikes with the grim precision of a king reclaiming shadows. But the packs pressed in, a tide of silver-fang betas snarling oaths of purity, Storm Ridge warriors howling for the traitor's crown, their numbers overwhelming the chamber's confines, the air thick with sweat and the metallic bite of wounds freshly opened. Garrick stood frozen at the fray's edge, his sword limp in his grip, eyes locked on Caressa, with a desperation that pierced deeper than any thorn. The wind tore at his cloak, revealing the scars of their shared past, marks from hunts under the same moon, nights when his touch had been a haven against the cold. Now those eyes pleaded, raw with the guilt of complicity, the alpha mate who had yielded to pack law's blade rather than his heart's pull. "Caressa," he called again, voice cracking over the din, barely audible against the weavos that echoed from the ravine outside. A beta lunged past him, dagger aimed at her belly, but her vines lashed out instinctively, coiling around the attacker's wrist with a sickening snap, thorns embedding deep enough to elicit a guttural cry. Blood welled, feeding the stems, and the rose at its tip unfurled fuller, mocking the violence with its serene beauty. She felt the child surge within, a fierce rhythm syncing with her pulse, as if the covenant demanded she choose, not just for survival, but for the legacy it promised. Introspection clawed at her amid the melee. The Pyre's flames had spared her, revealing a path beyond rejection. Yet here, in this crucible of kin and betrayal, freedom tasted like ash. Unleash the full might of the Pathfinder's gift, and she could bind them all. Varric's ambition crushed, Garrick's regrets silenced in thorns. But at what cost? The packs were her blood, twisted though it ran, and Mercy's whisper echoed the Deuce's lore. True strength lay not in dominion, but in the sacrifice that mended fractures. Thorn glanced back, his face blood-streaked, gray eyes holding a question that mirrored her own turmoil, the nascent bond between them a tether, pulling her toward redemption's edge, where love proved itself not in conquest, but in the choice to heal. Varric broke through then, his sword cleaving a vine in a spray of sap and petals, the blade whistling toward Thorn's flank. The king twisted, but not fast enough. Steel bit into his shoulder, parting flesh with a wet tear, fresh blood arcing to splatter the roses below. Thorn staggered, a low growl escaping his lips, but he countered with a savage sweep that forced Varric back, the traitor's laugh turning to a snarl as Thorns snagged his boot. "You cling to illusions, Blackthorn," Varric spat, circling like a wolf scenting weakness, his armor dented but unyielding, runes glowing faintly under the moonlight's fractured spill. "Purity demands excision. This Omega and her bastard are the rot. I'll mount your head on Ironclaw's gates and burn her gift to cinders." The words ignited something primal in Caressa, the wind howling her rage through the chamber, carrying distant weavos that seemed to mourn the impending spill. Garrick surged forward at last, shoving a Silverfang beta aside, his face a storm of conflict. "Enough!" he roared, interposing himself between Varric and Thorn, sword raised not in attack, but barrier. The packs faltered, murmurs rippling like cracks in ice, loyalty fracturing under the weight of doubt. She was one of us, the Pyre. It was fear, not judgment. "Varric, your whispers poisoned us all." His admission hung heavy, a confession torn from the depths, eyes meeting Caressa's with the raw vulnerability of lost love. Betrayal's blade had cut him too, leaving shame where once there had been certainty. Varric whirled on him, blade flashing, but Garrick parried, the clash ringing like a death knell. Traitor to traitors, the rival Alpha sneered, pressing the assault, their duel drawing the packs into a hesitant circle, blades half lowered as the moral rift widened. Caressa watched, heart pounding with the visceral ache of choice. Forgive Garrick's weakness, extend the rose's grace to bind wounds rather than bind foes, or let war consume them, claiming vengeance for the Pyre's injustice. The child kicked harder, a urgent plea, and she felt the gift's philosophy uncoil in her veins. What was power, if not the mercy to spare the hand that scarred you? Thorn slumped against the wall, hand clamped over his new wound, blood seeping between fingers. Yet his gaze urged her on, not with alpha command, but the quiet ethical fire of one who knew guilt's forge. She stepped into the fray's heart, vines surging at her will, not to ensnare but to entwine, thorns retracting as stems wove a lattice between combatants, roses blooming in profusion to carpet the stone, their fragrance cutting through the blood scent like a balm. Petals brushed Garrick's cheek, drawing no blood but softening his stance, while Varric slashed wildly, severing blooms that reformed almost instantly under the moon's gaze. "Stand down," Caressa commanded, her voice carrying the weight of revelation, steady despite the tremor in her soul. "The Deusa's covenant is not war, but union. Spill more blood, and you doom the packs to endless winter." The chamber fell into a breathless hush, broken only by the wind's mournful sigh and the distant crack of ice. Varric paused, sword mid-arc, eyes narrowing in calculation, ambition warring with the miracle before him. Garrick lowered his blade fully, kneeling amid the roses, head bowed in surrender. "Forgive us," he whispered, the words a bridge across the abyss, his regret a mirror to Thorn's own melancholy. The king nodded faintly from his place, the bond with Caressa deepening in that shared gaze, love's proof emerging not as passion's blaze, but compassion's quiet flame, resisted no longer, but accepted as destiny's thread. Yet Varric lunged once more, defiance incarnate, his blade aimed at her heart. The vines rose like a living shield, thorns piercing his arm in a spray of red, halting him inches away. He crumpled, howling, as the packs recoiled, the ethical dilemma crystallizing. Mercy offered, but not without consequence. Caressa's body ached with the effort, the child stilling as if awaiting the final verdict, the moonlight bathing her in silver absolution. In that suspended moment, amid bloodied petals and shadowed faces, she glimpsed Rinascimento's dawn, not in victory's roar, but the fragile choice to heal what was broken, even as the storm raged on. The night whispered of sacrifices yet to come, the rose's thorns a reminder, redemption was no crown without the pierce of truth. The chamber's fragile truce shattered under the weight of Varric's final defiance, his blade halted mid-thrust by the vine's unyielding embrace, thorns delving into his flesh like the Deusa's judgment rendered in crimson. Blood cascaded from his arm, warm rivulets tracing paths down the stone to nourish the roses that carpeted the floor, their petals unfurling in silent accusation. Caressa's breath came in shallow gasps, the gift's surge ebbing like a tide retreating from jagged shores, leaving her body heavy with the child's insistent weight, a covenant now demanding culmination amid the storm's howl. The wind lashed through the fissure, carrying snowflakes that glittered like shattered stars, dusting the combatant's fur and steel in a veil of white remorse. Varric slumped to his knees, sword clattering from numb fingers, his scarred face contorted in a grimace that blended agony with unraveling ambition. The packs encircled him, their uivos fading into uneasy murmurs, blades lowered not in surrender, but exhaustion, the metallic tang of blood mingling with the rose's earthy perfume to forge an uneasy incense. Garrick remained knelt, his broad shoulders bowed under the avalanche of his choices, eyes lifting to meet Caressa's with the hollow ache of one who had glimpsed absolution's edge. Thorn leaned against the wall, his new wound seeping steadily. staining his cloak in dark blooms that echoed the flora around them. Yet his gray gaze held steady on her, a anchor forged in shared shadows, the nascent love between them no longer a resisted whisper, but a quiet roar, redemption's proof etched in every shared breath. She stepped forward, the cold stone biting her bare soles, each movement a visceral pull against the exhaustion coiling in her limbs. The moonlight fractured above, bathing her in silver that made the roses glow like embers of forgotten fires, their thorns retracting slowly as if sated by the spill. Introspection flooded her, slow and unrelenting. The Pyre's mercy had been no isolated grace, but the spark of this rebirth, where rejection's scars alchemized into sovereignty. The child stirred fiercely, a surge that rippled through her veins, sinking with the mountain's distant rumble, urging her toward the choice that would define not just her fate, but the pack's fractured legacy. Power tempted, unleash the vines fully, bind Varric and his ilk in eternal thorns, claim vengeance for the exile that had stripped her bare. Yet compassion's philosophy whispered deeper, a lunar truth. True union demanded sacrifice, the yielding of old wounds to heal the bloodlines poisoned by fear. "No more blood," Caressa declared, her voice a cadence rising above the wind's lament, steady despite the tremor in her core. The words carried the weight of the Deusa's gaze, vines responding to her will by weaving not barriers, but bridges, stems extending toward the packs, roses blooming along their lengths like invitations etched in petal and thorn. Garrick rose first, sheathing his blade with deliberate slowness, the motion a vow unspoken. He approached, halting at the lattice's edge, his hand extended palm up, scarred from hunts long past. "We were blind," he murmured, the confession raw as the frost-laced air, guilt carving deeper lines into his face. "The convergence, your child. It's the mending we feared." His eyes, once possessive, now held only the melancholy of lost claiming, yielding to the greater bond she had forged in fire and flight. Varric snarled, struggling against the vines that held him. But the fight drained from him as petals brushed his skin, drawing no fresh blood, but stirring a flicker of doubt in his ambitious glare. The packs shifted, betas from Silverfang and Stormridge, exchanging glances heavy with the night's revelations. War's cycle broken not by steel, but by the Omega's quiet command. Thorn pushed himself upright, wincing as blood trickled from his shoulder. But he moved to her side, his presence a warm bulwark against the cold. His hand found the small of her back, a touch resisted no longer, its heat seeping through her shift like moonlight on snow, affirming the union that had bloomed from exile's thorns. "Sacrifice," he whispered, voice gravel-soft, laced with the ethical resolve that had haunted him since his throne's fall. "Not of flesh, but of pride. Let the roses bind us as they spared you." Caressa nodded, the choice crystallizing in her soul. A renascimento not of solitary triumph, but shared healing, where love proved itself through the mercy extended to betrayers. She channeled the gift one final time, the hum in her veins peaking as vines surged outward, encircling the chamber in a grand lattice of crimson and green. Thorns pierced no more. Instead, stems intertwined with the pack's cloaks and armor, roses unfurling in cascades that draped warriors like crowns of reluctant grace. Varric's resistance crumbled, his body slumping fully as the petals enveloped him, staunching his wound with their improbable balm, forcing him to confront the Deusa's truth. Ambition's blade yielded to compassion's bloom. Garrick knelt again, this time offering fealty, his pack following in a ripple of lowered heads, weavos transforming from threats to harmonious calls under the moon's watchful eye. The storm outside softened, winds sighing into a gentle hush, snow falling in lazy veils that blanketed the ravine in pristine white. Caressa's body trembled with release, the child stilling into a contented rhythm. as if the covenant had found its vessel fulfilled. Thorn drew her close, his arms encircling her protectively, the scent of his blood and pine mingling with the rose's fragrance, a sensory tapestry of union forged in pain. In his embrace, she felt the love's redemption, not a reward for survival, but the proof of choices made, his melancholy easing into quiet hope, her rejection reborn as destiny's queen. The packs gathered, not as conquerors but witnesses, the High Elder's ancient staff, once wielded in condemnation, now extended in benediction, murmuring of lunar prophecies realized. Under the moon's cresting glow, the chamber transformed. Roses climbing the icy walls, their light refracting in prisms of silver and red, illuminating faces etched with awe and atonement. Caressa placed her hands over her belly once more, feeling the life within pulse in harmony with Thorn's heartbeat against her back. Exile's bite faded, replaced by the warmth of rebirth, packs united not by bloodlines of purity, but by the sacrifice of mercy, the Pathfinder's gift weaving freedom from chains of fear. The night exhaled, howls distant now, echoes of wilds accepting the new order. Yet in that fragile dawn, as petals drifted like sanguine snow, Caressa knew the path ahead held thorns yet untrod. Redemption, a flame kept alive by vigilant hearts, love's tender proof enduring through winter's veil. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment, and subscribe, because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive.